Isaiah 40, verses 21 through 31. Hear the word of the Lord. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to live in, who brings princes to naught and makes the rulers of earth as nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows upon them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their host and numbers them, calling them all by name, because he is great in strength, mighty in power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from Yahweh, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? Yahweh is the everlasting God, creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for Yahweh shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Many of us grew up with the notion that we could accomplish anything we set our minds to. We were taught that the secret to success in life was simply don't quit. Keep going. Try harder. I was required to memorize a poem by Edgar A. Guest with that title, Don't Quit. Often a goal is nearer than it seems to faint and faltering man. The message was that if we would simply continue working toward our goals, the goal ahead, whatever we had designed and desired, we would be able to reach it. If only we did not give up along the way. Keep at it. Don't quit. Victory is just around the bend. How does that work if the goals, projections, and ambitions we hold before us conflict with God's purposes for our lives? Someone was asking recently if at age 41, if it was too late to embark upon a course of study to obtain a law degree. Well, there's nothing necessarily wrong with beginning such a degree, such a course of study at age 41 or 51. But there are a lot of other questions that we might ask ourselves. What do we hope to gain from such a course of action? Will it be worth the energy and time and resources spent in claiming hold of this degree or this other purpose we have in mind? Do we have the capacity to accomplish the goal and task that we have set for ourselves? But perhaps more importantly, the question is, how will this goal that we are defining for ourselves fit in with God's plan and God's design for our lives? too often. We have this notion that God's call upon our lives is relegated to only a couple of issues. It's about our eternal salvation, yes. And then in the case of certain individuals, it is about a call to paid ministry, to full-time Christian service. And then beyond that, we want to settle into the notion that God only really cares about those things that we deem religious or spiritual or moral. And so we relegate God to a sliver of our lives and exclude God from all things social and economic and business and political. We relegate God to a portion of our existence and hide away the rest of it as though God had no reason, no interest, and should have no impact upon the rest of our dreams, goals, desires, and ambitions. Now, we want to declare the goals, dreams, and ambitions we have in life. We want to find some other way to pin the direction that we will take, whether in a career course or in a time of our entertainment and enjoyment, or how we occupy ourselves in what we call retirement. God seems an afterthought. And yet then we have this very social and cultural adaptation of verses like some we find here in Isaiah, where we claim that we can use God to somehow underwrite and guarantee us victory in all the exploits and endeavors we take, far removed from God's plan, God's direction, God's initiative, God's purposes in our lives. We've all heard verses like Philippians 4:13, where Paul writes, I can all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we've heard this verse taken out of context to say, oh, I can count on God. I can count on Christ to underwrite my dreams, my goals, and my ambitions. We've seen it placed on bumper stickers. We've seen it used on t-shirts and at athletic sporting events, claiming that my team will have victory and excel in a competition because we have tacked God's name onto the end of our goals and dreams and desires. That is hardly what Isaiah has in mind as he writes these words about an eagle soaring upon wings, held aloft by God's breath blowing on it to maintain it in its flight. For the eagle is not driving its own course of direction. It's not planning its steps, does not know where it will find its next meal, but launches itself out into the void, trusting that God's breath will support it and carry it where it might find its next meal. Trusting that it will equally find its way back home to care for its young, as a product of God's will, God's determination, and God's purpose and plan for its life and care. Isaiah was not talking about using God the way we imagine rubbing the lamp of some jinn hidden underneath our jacket. To utilize God as this genie coming out of the bottle or lamp or vase of some kind, jumping to our assistance and beck and call at the time of our need to allow us to fulfill our goals, dreams, and ambitions. Isaiah was writing in a context of exile, humiliation, loss, deportation, of a people utterly discouraged because life had torn them upside down, carted them off into an unknown land, and they were there amidst uncharted waters, unsure of what could possibly happen that would be positive. And Isaiah says, do not worry anymore about charting your course, about devising your plans, about thinking that all this is about your initiative and your drive and your desire to accomplish and do. Rather, he says, wait upon Yahweh. Find your meaning and purpose in what Yahweh is designing for you. As strong as we may believe that we are, as much as we may want to think, that by flexing our muscles and giving our all and being dedicated and wholehearted and not quitting and persevering, we can make life obey our desires. Isaiah says no. In the midst of exile, it becomes apparent. We are not in control of the world. We are not the ones who can stretch out the heavens and call a world into being. We are not the masters of our fate, who sail through the storms undaunted because we have charted a course of safety. Rather, Isaiah says, wait on Yahweh. Allow Yahweh to work in you and through you and in spite of you. Cast your cares and your life upon God, that God might carry you through beyond where your strength would be exhausted. Beyond that point where we would break and fall weary by the side of the road. Trust in Yahweh, Isaiah says. Wait upon God, that in God we might find the uplifting, the strength, the purpose, the accomplishment that God has designed for our lives. Isaiah was not asking them to tack God's name upon the end of their statement of goals and objectives and ambitions. Isaiah was saying it is not sufficient to simply lay claim to God's name and go on with life as we have desired and designed it to be. Rather, we lay our desires, ambitions, and goals aside that God's will might be done in us, through us, and in spite of us. Because God is the one who can bring things to fruition. God is the one in whom our trust we should be placing. God is the one that is worthy of giving control and direction of our lives. That in God's presence and under the support of God's breath, we might fly through the world, undaunted by the storms that would assail our plans, as we embrace instead what God has in store for us. When will we learn to seek God's direction as primary in our lives? When will we quit struggling to fashion God into a servant of our goals and ambitions? When will we give up on portraying God as little more than a mascot for our desires? When will we rest on God's purposes rather than growing faint in our attempts to accomplish our own?